and find out what are the tips to spend wisely this Black Friday. And we're joined by the CEO of Debt Busters, that's Binay Sager. Mr. Sager, thank you very much for your time. Let's begin with exactly what you are going to advise us on here. As you heard the one shopper there talking to Dumaule saying he is going to spend in accordance with his budget. What is spending wisely, or how does one go about spending wisely?
I think that consumer is very wise, as you said, and I think it's great. That's music to my ears to hear about consumers budgeting beforehand and knowing what they want to purchase. I think it's a little bit like, shopping for food. You want to go there with a list and you want to know what is the maximum that you can spend, regardless of what deals are on offer. And I think often what you would find is a lot of consumers look forward to this day from many months ago, and they make a long list of things that they would like to purchase and wait to see whether those will be on sale. So I think in this case, what that individual was telling us was perfect in the sense that he said he's sticking to his budget. He's not going to spend more or less. He's just going to spend what he allocated for his budget. And if you remember, now we are 2 months away, more or less, in terms of opening of the new season for schools in January. A lot of our kids will need, new shoes, new bags, new stationery. It's a great time to go and purchase those things, especially if they're on sale. So I think one of our biggest tips is first to make a list of things that you think would be necessary for you for next year and try to see whether those things are on sale. I think the second tip is probably, as the gentleman said, to have a specific budget. What are you willing to spend maximum, and stick within that budget. Don't be tempted necessarily by, buy to pay for one type of deals for some things that you may not need, but rather stick to that and know what your maximum is. I think those are probably the two easiest tips to give to consumers.
Yeah. And one of the things that I heard from the consumers there, as my colleague was talking to them, is one of them, or was my colleague himself, in fact, saying that he sees nothing extravagant that people seem to be purchasing. So that leads me to think that people are buying basic necessities, whether it be clothing items, because that can be categorized as a basic necessity. However, at a time like this, we know that TV sets appear to be one of those very, very hot items to look out for by the consumers. And I'm going back to what you said, which is make a list of what you want to buy. How do you make that wise decision on what to purchase based on the list of things that you would have compiled?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I mean, at Debt Busters, what we see is that consumers, exactly as you say, are these days actually spending on necessities. I think, the days of spending on luxuries in South Africa have been over for a number of years. That's our belief. And often what you would see is, just like we saw in the shots earlier, consumers are spending money on what they deem to be necessities for themselves. Now, you ask a very good question about the TV. Of course, we all want to see the World Cup goals on the best TV possible, including me being one of them. It's very important that, I get to see Messi or Neymar or whoever, with the best shot. If that is a necessity, consumer goods also have a shelf life of a certain number of years. I think that's okay, as long as it's budgeted for. I think what doesn't really work is similar to, like, if you go, you're going to buy food on an empty stomach, you're probably going to end up buying a few things that you may not need or you may not eat in the end. And this is a little bit like that. If you go with a list, at least you know within your list what's possible and what's not possible. But I do want to go back to something that you mentioned, which is very important for the South African consumer. Yesterday's news of the interest rate hike was another increase for consumers. Now we're looking at a prime rate of 10.5%. It's the highest it's been for the last 3 years. And if you are holding a bond of 600,000 rand, for example, compared to what you need to pay today on a monthly basis, compare that to a year ago, last November, which was the first time the interest rate hike started in this cycle, you're paying 2,000 rand more towards that bond on a monthly basis. That's what you're expected to pay if you have a bond of 600,000 rand. That's a lot of money for our consumers to worry about. And on top of that, we also have inflation, which is, much higher than it's been in a number of years. So I think our consumers are probably more savvy than sometimes we give them credit for, in the sense that they know exactly how much money they've got to spend. And I think a lot of people would have probably put aside a little bit of money to make sure that they're covering the necessities in this Black Friday deals. But I do fear for the consumer with regards to the twin eyes, as we call them, interest rate hike and inflation, and what the impact might be on the South African consumer going into this festive season.
Yeah, and I suppose that's where we're actually going to conclude the conversation around going to a bank or going to a store and applying for credit. Is that something that you would still encourage at a time like this?
I think credit is very important for our economy to go around. It's a very important lever from an expenditure, but also from an investment perspective. My view always, and our view is that it depends on what you want to apply for money. If you're going to put it into good use, for example, if you're going to use it to pay for your kids' schooling for next year, and that's the only way that you can afford to pay the lump sum, it's a good use of money. It's something that you're investing in for the longevity of your family and your kids. If it's something that, if you're applying to get a loan to buy a TV, for example, it's probably not a good idea. If you have to do that, if you have to borrow to buy on consumer goods and other things, it's probably not a good idea, and you probably should reconsider it.
Thank you very much for that sage advice. That's the CEO of Debt Busters, Binay Sega, giving us some really important tips here around how to avoid being indebted after Black Friday has come and gone.